Putin tries to justify Ukraine invasion. Russian forces continue to storm Mariupol steel plant. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has attempted to justify his unprecedented invasion of Ukraine on Victory Day, one of the most important events on the country's national calendar. The West was preparing for the invasion of our land, including Crimea, Putin said without providing evidence, according to a Reuters translation. He added that NATO was creating threats at Russia's borders. Russia had amassed some 190,000 troops on its borders with Ukraine in the weeks before its invasion. There was little evidence of military aggression from Ukraine toward Russia, and Moscow's claims to the contrary were seen by many as a pretext for justifying the invasion. Meanwhile, dozens are feared dead after a school in the Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine was hit by Russian shelling. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that 60 people died in the attack. UN says 3,381 killed in Ukraine since start of war, warns death toll is likely. The United Nations has confirmed 3,381 civilian deaths, including at least 235 children, in Ukraine since Russia invaded its ex-Soviet neighbor on Feb 24. The agency also reported 3,680 civilian injuries in the conflict so far. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said the death toll in Ukraine is likely higher, because the armed conflict can delay. The international body said most of the civilian casualties recorded were caused by the use of explosive weapons with a wide impact area, including shelling from heavy artillery and multiple launch rocket systems, as well as missiles and air. Russian ambassador to Poland hit with red paint in Warsaw. Russia's ambassador to Poland was splattered by red paint thrown at him by protesters opposed to the war in Ukraine, preventing him from paying respects on Monday at a Warsaw cemetery to Red Army soldiers who died during World War. Ambassador Sergei Andreev arrived at the Soviet soldiers' cemetery to lay flowers on Victory Day, which marks the defeat of Nazi Germany by the Allies. The holiday was celebrated with pomp in a parade at Red Square in Moscow. As he arrived at the Soviet soldiers' cemetery in the Polish capital, Andreev was met by hundreds of activists opposed to Russia's war in Ukraine. The protesters carried Ukrainian flags and chanted "fascist" and "murderer" at him, while some were dressed in white sheets smeared with blood, symbolizing the Ukrainian victims of Russia's war. Other people in his entourage were also seen splattered with what appeared to be red paint. "We will win," Ukraine's leader says as he commemorates World War II sacrifice. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has reiterated that his country will defeat Russia's invasion and will not cede any of its territory to. Speaking on Monday as Russia held its annual Victory Day military parade, Zelensky commemorated the deaths of more than 8 million Ukrainians in World War II and said Kyiv would not allow Moscow to appropriate the victory over Nazism just for. On the day of victory over Nazism, we are fighting for a new victory. The road to it is difficult, but we have no doubt that we will win, Zelensky said, Reuters reported. As Russia's leader Vladimir Putin invoked the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany and likened that triumph to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Zelensky said there are no shackles that can bind our free spirit. There is no occupier who can take root in our free land. There is no invader who can rule over our free people. Sooner or later we win, he said. Russia's Putin blames the West for Ukraine invasion in annual Victory Day speech. President Vladimir Putin told the crowd in Moscow that Russian forces in Ukraine are defending the motherland as he sought to defend the Kremlin's unprovoked onslaught. Speaking at Russia's annual Victory Day parade, Putin said the country's invasion of Ukraine had been necessary because the West was preparing for the invasion of our land, including Crimea. He provided no evidence for his claims. Putin mirroring fascism of 77 years ago, UK's Wallace says. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his generals are mirroring the fascism and tyranny of 77 years ago, and their invasion of Ukraine dishonors its military past, British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said in a speech to coincide with Russia's Victory Day parade commemorating the end of the World War II. Wallace said the Russian generals were as complicit as their president, and should face court-martial. Through the invasion of Ukraine, Putin and his inner circle of generals are now mirroring fascism and tyranny of 77 years ago, repeating the errors of the last century's totalitarian regime. Russian forces continued to storm Azovstal steel plant complex, Mariupol official says. An advisor to the mayor of Mariupol says Russian forces have continued their attack on Ukraine's besieged Azovstal steel plant complex shortly after all women, children and elderly were evacuated. As expected, after the departure of the UN column outside the Donetsk region, the occupiers began storming Azovstal, Petro Andriushchenko said, according to a trend. In particular, an attempt was made to break through the bridge, which was used for the evacuation. Unsuccessful, he added. Putin claims the West was preparing for the invasion of our land. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has attempted to justify his unprecedented invasion of Ukraine on Victory Day, one of the most important events on the country's national calendar. The West was preparing for the invasion of our land, including Crimea, Putin said without providing evidence, according to a Reuters translation. He added that NATO was creating threats at Russia's borders. Speaking before a massive parade of troops, tanks and military hardware in Moscow, Putin also doubled down on Russia's strategy of focusing on the eastern Donbass. "You are fighting for your motherland, its future," he said to pro-Russian separatist fighters, based in the Donetsk and Luhansk areas of the region. After initially targeting the north, east and south of Ukraine in its invasion, Russia switched its strategy and objectives in late March after making few territorial gains. It announced it was withdrawing from areas around Kyiv and the north and would instead focus on the liberation of the Donetsk and Luhansk areas. Russia launched an unprecedented invasion of its neighbor Ukraine on February 24, after amassing some 190,000 troops on the borders in the weeks before. There was little evidence of military aggression from Ukraine toward Russia, and Moscow's claims to the contrary were seen by many as a pretext for justifying the invasion. Russia prepares for Victory Day parades across the country. Russia is set to hold its massive Victory Day military parades on Monday, with 28 Russian cities set to hold military marches to mark the 77th anniversary of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in World War. Over 65,000 people will take part in them and about 2,400 armament and material units will be presented, Russian news agency TASS reported. The largest parade is held in Moscow and is expected to be presided over by President Vladimir Putin. In a recorded speech to a group of 7 leaders Sunday, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that while May 8, Victory in Europe Day, was a key day of remembrance for all the victims of World War II, for the fragility of peace and the inadmissibility of any But what is remembrance for others today, for our people is, unfortunately, just news, every day. He said a Russian bomb had killed 60 civilians in a village in Luhansk, saying the victims were hiding from shelling in a school which was attacked by a Russian airstrike. He said Russia was imitating precisely the evil that the Nazis brought to Europe.